Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The giants before us. Throughout Native American burial mounds across the Midwest since the 1800s, strange 8 to 12 foot tall skeletons have been unearthed of what appear to be a race of giant humans that once occupied North America. Not only was there allegedly multiple ethnicities of these giants present, but some exhibited strange deformities such as a second row of teeth, 6 fingers and 6 toes, or even 4 horn-like growths protruding from the forehead. The skeletons were also notably broader and stockier than modern humans, with some purportedly having elongated skulls with wide-set jaws, with a far more pronounced sagittal crest. Native North and South Americans both share similar storied traditions of violent encounters between their ancestors and a red-haired race of cannibalistic giants which had inhabited the land before them. Unilaterally, these conflicts all ended with the giants being systematically wiped out by their smaller and more cunning adversaries. Interestingly, other accounts of ancient red-haired giants also exist in other parts of the world, with many cultures sharing similar themes in their mythologies. Perhaps most notably the pan-cultural meme of giants having been something far more common before the onset of a great flood or other cataclysm. Dubiously, evidence of these finds typically goes missing shortly after being brought to scientific institutions, leading many to write this phenomenon off as little more than hoaxes. Interestingly enough, however, there seems no shortage of credible archaeologists and anthropologists over the last century who have testified to the authenticity of such discoveries. But even this does little to dissuade skeptics, particularly in an age of outlandish clickbait articles and clearly photoshopped hoaxes. And with modern bans on the excavation of Native American burial mounds, it's unlikely any new discoveries will be occurring with any frequency in the near future.
A well-documented sighting by Magellan occurred in 1520 near the harbor of San Julian, Mexico. There, Magellan and his crew came upon a red-haired giant that stood nearly 10 feet tall, and whom Magellan described as having a voice like a bull. Later, Magellan learned from normal-sized natives that the giant belonged to a neighboring tribe. Remarkably, Magellan's logs show that he and his crew captured 2 of these living giants and brought them aboard his ship, intending to bring them back to Europe. Unfortunately, the giants grew ill and they both died during the return voyage. Magellan had their remains buried at sea. 58 years later, giants still roamed San Julian. None other than Sir Francis Drake recorded encountering several red-haired men who stood over 9 feet tall. In the years that followed, many more explorers and seafarers also reported seeing giants roaming that area. 2 lesser-known explorers, Jacob Lemaire and Wilhelm Schouten, discovered an intact skeleton of a pair of 9-foot humans. They each entered meticulous descriptions of the skeletons in their journals.
Giants were real across the ancient world. They were slowly hunted away by modern humans because they were inherently more savage because of Nephilim blood lineage.
Or most likely the Nephilim is just a legend attributed to these giants, and there isn't actually any divine lineage or any of that other made-up supernatural hogwash. Different cultures came up with different myths and stories to explain these offshoots of mankind which were different. Calling them gods, half-gods, and whatnot was just one way of primitive minds trying to make sense of offshoots of people who were bigger than them. Probably similar to how smaller offshoots of humans may have possibly been the origins of pixies, elves, and forest sprites. I know you guys like to believe in supernatural woo stuff like demon, but just stop trying to interconnect fringe supernatural make-believe with semi-legitimate subjects of crypto-anthropology and cryptozoology which have one foot in the realm of legitimate science. It's just like when that one dude was on X and suddenly everything from Bigfoot to aliens to men in black to dinosaurs was obviously nothing more than just gin. If these giants existed, they were most likely a subset of modern humans or a cousin subspecies like Neanderthals which developed prodigious size, perhaps a continuation of the larger Cro-Magnon or Homo heidelbergensis due to favorable environmental conditions. A double row of teeth, 6 fingers, and heightened aggression could have been the product of inbreeding or incestuously limited gene pools.
Like it or not, establishing a foothold in the currently established norm of accepted sciences is the only way to get any of this stuff recognized. Unless, of course, you prefer the tinfoil hat approach of photoshopped images on the internet and drawing ever more convoluted connections between different crypto disciplines, effectively accomplishing nothing more than building dubious supposition upon even more dubious supposition. Being willing to believe in something that goes against the norm is only the first step, not the final cozy one. Otherwise, you're no different than everyone else. Then again, maybe you're afraid of knowing for a fact just what mysteries are actually true and which ones are actually false.
To all you Westerners, listen up. I am a native of Afghanistan who was raised in the mountains of Kandahar. I have witnessed so many weird things over there that if I were to tell you all about it, you would crap your pants. Yes, it's true. These giants do exist. I have seen them several times in my youth from a distance and also had a very disturbing and frightening encounter of third degree. Once my grandma sent me out just 2 hours before sunset to go to the local tandoor bread shop in the next village to get some bread. I had to go through a mountain valley pass, and on top of one of the mountains there is a cave. We were told by our elders to never go to the cave. But I have been the kind of person from a young age who has been a rascal, is very adventurous and also very curious to look up things. So I decided to let myself go and check out what's up there in the cave. It took me about 20 minutes to go up to the cave. It's a big cave with bats hanging from its ceiling, loads of them. I went inside and immediately felt a repulsive stench. But I still continued further into the cave. Further inside the cave there were some boulders, and as I approached one of the biggest boulders I started to hear strange noises. As if someone was holding a conversation with someone in a very loud tone. This gave me the chills. But in Afghanistan every male kid is taught from a young age that he is not a man if he backs off. So I climbed up one of the boulders well hidden from sight to see who was talking. I saw 3 hairy creatures who had the features of humans but were not humans. 2 hairy adults and 1 young one. Probably their kid. The male was about 15 feet tall, the female probably 12 to 13 feet and the kid 6 feet tall or something. But all of them were very heavy built and had red hair on top of their head. The eyes of the adults were also lit red. They had double rows of teeth. I studied their legs and hands too. They had more toes and fingers than a normal human being. And they were all naked. The stench either came from them or it was the cadaver they were eating on. They spoke some odd language, but I could pick up a few words and sentences that were similar to my language, Pashto. They were about 15 to 20 meters away from me, and I kept very silent. While they were talking to each other, one of them said, "There is an odd human smell in here." The female said, "It's probably some humans going past outside, so keep eating." As soon as I picked this up, I slowly slid down from the boulder and made my exit from there while looking back off my shoulder several times to see if I had been detected or not. As soon as I was outside the cave entrance, I legged it like Quicksilver from X-Men to the shop to get my bread. Now I knew why the elders were saying never got to the cave. I was really lucky. If they had caught me, I don't know what would have happened to me. But I learnt my lesson to listen to my elders.
Why is this on X? Is this not science?
Sadly true, and of all the fringe sciences and forbidden archaeological subjects, this is arguably one of the most tangible and within plausible scientific reach. We're discovering more unusually cousin subspecies of humanity and our ancestors all the time in the fossil record, and it's not inconceivable that some may have existed alongside up until fairly recently.
Why would scientists want to hide information about giants so badly? How does people knowing giants exist hurt them?
Because they don't want it known that we killed man. We are the dwarfs. The greedier and smaller race is obsessed with pretty metals. The savage excuse was used to wipe out many indigenous groups when we arrived somewhere looking for pretty metal.
Consider these points. In the ancient times, the diet of people consisted of simple foodstuffs that were marked by toil, famine, disease, war, and other hardships. Most people, especially settled civilized folks, would be very short compared to modern-day humans. A short Google search on medieval house door sizes is one example. Meanwhile, there are those who have access to a steady, more nutritious diet and avoidance of hardships such as the kings and pharaohs of the day. This leads to a royal family that not only has the divine right of kings, but are also taller and bigger than their serfs, and would reinforce the idea of authority and being represented as bigger, both symbolically and physically. Another notion would be the wild barbarian nomads who ate more meats and dairy and grew larger than their settled farmer cousins. The Germans were giants compared to the Roman legionnaires, so it must have felt very much like fighting giants.
After reading the thread so far, I think we can all conclude that the biological and archaeological establishment in the world has either never found fossils or had them systematically, conspiratorially removed from the public view. So, if we disregard the absence of fossil record evidence, there are many other ways to determine, archaeologically, whether or not these giant sapiens existed. For example, mammals of large size need to consume a larger amount of calories per day, by virtue of the fact that their bodies must process energy at a greater rate to support the major organs and higher motor functions. We'd reasonably expect to find giant tools such as oversized nets and harpoons for fishing, giant spears and arrows for hunting, or even evidence of giant agricultural projects which would seem conversely large compared to the estimated Homo sapiens population at that time. Where are the ancient garbage dumps which would surely be full of giant waste and trash?
Most likely in the mounds of which they claim to have found the skeletons, which modern laws prevent from excavating. Still, you'd expect to find some massive arrowheads or spear points.
Fine point, but just to be contrarian, allow me to point out that established governments and rule of law throughout the Americas has historically been outright ignored or not enforced when it comes to native lands or property rights. Personally, I think Native and First Peoples protection laws are a good thing and should be upheld rigorously, but I should think that, for as long as archaeologists have been plundering native lands, we would have found more circumstantial evidence to support the existence of these so-called giants.
This is a Bigfoot encounter told to me by my grandfather. It happened in the early fall of 1938. He and his friends did a backpacking trip to a small remote lake near Mount St. Helens. They did this annually. One year they even summited the volcano during their yearly camping trip. This particular year there were 5 of them. The hike end took a couple of days back then. There weren't as many dirt roads built as there are now. They chose late summer and early fall when the berries were in season and the fish were usually biting well because they did not want to pack much food. It helped to lighten the load of their heavy backpacks. My grandfather was a little over 20 years old during this backpacking trip. After the 2-day hike to the lake, they set up camp and decided the next morning that my grandfather and another guy would try to catch some fish. The other 3 young men would go collect berries. The next morning they did just that. My grandfather walked to the far side of the lake and his friend was on the side nearer to camp. The fish were biting and he had caught a few when all of a sudden he started to feel uneasy as if he were being watched. The hair on the back of his neck seemed to stand on end and then he got a whiff of a foul rotting stench. He started to look around and directly behind him, only 20 to 30 feet away, were 3 giant human-like creatures covered in dark brown hair from head to toe standing at the tree line. My grandfather was a large man around 6'4" and the smallest of the 3 creatures was just as tall as him. However, it was much wider at the shoulders and much thicker. According to what he was looking at, the next creature was a foot taller and then the third was even a foot taller than that one, putting each of them at 6 feet or better. The next one was over 7 feet and the other one was over 8 feet tall. He was overwhelmed with adrenaline from fear and panic. He wanted to run, however, these 3 giants staring at him were blocking the only direction that he could run. The only way he could get away would be to leap into the lake and swim. He decided his best option was to calm down and keep doing what he was doing. He cast in his line and began to fish again. Shortly after that, he caught another nice trout, and while reeling it in, it dawned on him that these creatures may be here for his fish. He unhooked the trout and tossed it to them. The smallest of the 3 stepped away from the tree line and retrieved the trout and brought it back to the other 2. So he continued to toss fish to them. The smaller the 3 Bigfoot continued to retrieve the trout. After a while, he landed a really nice 4th trout. He went to toss it back to them, but they were gone. He then grabbed his equipment and ran around the lake in the direction of the other friend. After finding him, he said that they needed to get the hell out of there and began to tell him what happened as they headed back to camp. When they got to camp, the other friends were already there picking up camp gear and in a hurry. They stated that they ran across 3 giant hairy creatures while out berry hunting. It took the group only a day to hike back out downhill. They did not know what they had encountered. They had never heard of anything like that in the 1930s since the term Bigfoot had not been known. After that trip, they never went back to Mount St. Helens. They changed the location of their yearly backpacking trip. My grandfather stated it wasn't until the 1967 Patterson/Gimlin Bigfoot film was shown in theaters across the nation that he finally had a name for the 3 giant creatures he had a close encounter with.
The history of Britain is very interesting if you go back far enough. The oldest accounts all state that it was an island of giants, the last of which were said to be driven out by Brutus and other Romans. The very last was said to be thrown off a cliff during a wrestling match with Corinius, and the cliff still bears the name Gog-Magog's Leap. There also is a statue in the Guildhall in London. Before he was killed, he was held captive as a guard. In fact, countless places in Britain are named after giants, and the landscape leaves possible indicators for some kind of factual basis. There are giant figures carved into many hillsides: the Giant's Causeway, Fingal's Table, Stonehenge, Spinster's Rock, and many more. Another interesting place is Malta, said to be the last stronghold of the European giants. Maltese folklore describes giants as having built the many temples on the island, which led to the name Gigantoja, meaning Giant's Tower. Like in Britain, many of the sites have incredibly large stones. A lot of the island's folklore suggests that some of the temples are connected to deep underground tunnel, which is where the giants eventually fled to.
On August 10, 1891, the New York Times reported that scientists from the Smithsonian Institution had discovered several large pyramidal monuments on Lake Mills, near Madison, Wisconsin. Madison was in ancient days the center of a teeming population numbering not less than 200,000, the Times said. The excavators found an elaborate system of defensive works which they named Fort Astellan. The celebrated mounds of Ohio and Indiana can bear no comparison, either in size, design, or the skill displayed in their construction with these gigantic and mysterious monuments of the earth. Erected we know not by whom, and for what purpose we can only conjecture, said the Times. On December 20, 1897, the Times followed up with a report on 3 large burial mounds that had been discovered in Maple Creek, Wisconsin. One had recently been opened. In it was found the skeleton of a man of gigantic size. The bones measured from head to foot over 9 feet and were in a fair state of preservation. The skull was as large as a half-bushel measure. Some finely tempered rods of copper and other relics were lying near the bones. Giant skulls and skeletons of a race of Goliaths have been found on a very regular basis throughout the Midwestern states for more than 100 years. Giants have been found in Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, and New York, and their burial sites are similar to the well-known mounds of the Mound Builder people. The spectrum of Mound Builder history spans a period of more than 5,000 years, from 3,400 before Common Era to the 16th Common Era, a period greater than the history of ancient Egypt and all of its dynasties. There is a prevailing scholarly consensus that we have an adequate historical understanding of the peoples who lived in North America during this period. However, the long record of anomalous finds like those at Lake Delavan suggests otherwise.
I'm normally a science poster, but I've been noticing an unbelievable trend in human history and development, and it's something that anybody in science would get shunned and treated like a flat earther for. They can tend to be like the Catholic Church that once opposed science itself when it comes to new ideas. So I'm here to try to build up my theory and hear what /x/ thinks regarding the subject. So giants. Stories of giants are prominent in almost every culture, whether that's the Old Testament talking about Goliath, the Quran talking about demons seeding humans to create massive abominations of humans, feudal Japanese legends, and even 20th century Japan celebrating its supposed history of giants. The Scottish legends about giant trolls to the gigantes of both Greek and Roman mythology. Mind, they were called something else in Roman mythos, although I initially forget. People believe in things for a reason. Those here that participate in divination general, for example, believe in it because they believe they can see the effects. People believe in religion due to both available ancient texts and due to logical reasoning that points out the existence of their gods. Why would people believe in giants? Why would giants be so common in all cultures of the world, because perhaps they were once real. But maybe stories aren't the right logical foundation because after all, they're just stories. So what about the 120 centimeters, about 50 inches human femur? Or the North African dig sites? There's also the classic History Channel shows that try to prove that giants once walked the earth, and despite not being publicly recognized, they usually find legitimate evidence that is quite convincing. If there is logical and physical evidence, why isn't it being looked into and tweaked into our history? As previously stated, I'm not your normal tinfoil hatter. I'm a guy with interests in biology and astrophysics, but I am beginning to legitimately believe that giants were once real.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.